Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy Palmer. I'm the Science and Operations Officer here with the National Weather Service in Shreveport. We've had some fires in our area this past week, especially in northwest Louisiana, and there's been some question of whether or not these fires could have been started by lightning. So we're going to go back and look at Monday and Tuesday primarily and look at the lightning that occurred in the area and whether or not it was in the vicinity of the Fryeburg Fire that occurred along the Webster and Bienville parish lines. So I wanted to give you what our antecedent conditions are. Over the last 3 months, we have gone from essentially no drought over our area. In fact, we had above normal precipitation across most of our area in May and June, to now, in October, we are looking at the majority of our area with extreme or exceptional drought across the area. In fact, the last significant precipitation we saw fall in our area was back in July. We've had a couple of hit-and-miss storms between August and September, but nothing significant, which is why we have seen these extreme and exceptional drought conditions develop across our area. So going back to look at Monday and Tuesday, Monday was an interesting day. We had a front that was approaching the area, but ahead of this front, we've had compressional warming that actually led to record-breaking temperatures. At the time, our humidity values were primarily between 30 and 45% at the lowest point of the day, but probably the biggest story we had before this front moved through was the record-breaking temperatures, which were in the mid-90s. Monday evening, this weak cold front moved across the area, triggering isolated thunderstorms. On Tuesday, behind this weak cold front, we actually had very dry air filter into the area. Now, you noticed I said weak cold front. It's because we cooled down in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 degrees across the region. However, our temperatures were still ranging between 5 and 10 degrees above normal. We just weren't setting any records. Our daytime humidities, though, were falling to between 5 and 15%, which is highly unusual for this area. Our winds were primarily out in the northwest to north, 5 to 10 miles an hour, and every once in a while we would see a gust between 15 and 20 miles an hour, but they were still hit and miss. So, looking back at Monday evening, prior to the front moving through our area, this is our 0Z sounding. So this is, we launch our balloon, and the results that came back at 7 p.m. You can see on our sounding that there was still quite a bit of dry air near the surface. You can see that we were still quite warm. I don't remember what the temperature was at Shreveport at this time, but needless to say, we're over 30 degrees Celsius. So it was a warm and toasty day even at 7 p.m. But since our fire was to the southeast of Minden, I took a look at their obs. At 8 p.m., Minden was 85 degrees with 53% humidity. The winds were still out of the south at that time at 5 miles an hour. They did have some clouds in the area with the approaching front, but they were broken at 7,500 feet. At 9 p.m., the front was actually now moving through the Minden area. Temperature dropped by 9 degrees to 76. Humidity increased to 81%. You can now see the winds with the front were east-northeast at 12 miles an hour and gusting to 29. There was a thunderstorm reported at the time. Our cloud ceiling had actually dropped to 6,000 feet, and they were reporting rain. In fact, they had 0.2 of an inch in Minden at 9 p.m. So, let's take a look at the lightning. You can see here that there were roughly 5 clusters of thunderstorms that produced lightning. The one that we really want to take a look at here is in northwest Louisiana over Webster Parish. This is the hourly total lightning that occurred between 8 and 9 p.m. here on the left, and the right image is what occurred between 9 and 10 p.m. for the total lightning. Now, if we take a closer look at Webster and Bienville parishes, you can see there was quite a bit of lightning activity. But when I say total lightning, I'm talking about lightning that occurred within the clouds, between the clouds, as well as what was between the clouds and struck the ground. So if I actually break it down to just the lightning strikes that struck the ground, we roughly had 32 strikes in our area. The majority of these strikes were negative in nature. There was one strike that was positive up in Claiborne Parish. Typically, we see most lightning starts with positive strikes. However, you can get a lightning start with a negative strike. Alright, so let's take a look at the reflectivity here with the storms that moved through. There was kind of one primary cluster that moved through Webster and Bienville Parish. You can see two of the storms here. This is after the storm moved through Minden. This is 9:12 p.m. and you can see the approximate fire location here of the Fryeburg Fire. And if we just step through over the next, say, 30 minutes, you can see that the northern storm really kind of brushed I'll say the edge of where the fire was. They might have received a little bit of precipitation on the fire, but for the most part, the brunt of the moisture and the precipitation occurred to the north and the east of the fire, while the other system or storm cell moved to the south. So it really was just on the edge of that northern cell and did not likely see much precipitation. This is the last image that we have from 9/31. So if I step back real quick, you can see that for the most part, it's there right on the edge, and this gives you another quick overview where the approximate location of the fire was on the edge of the storms, not under the core that would have been getting the precipitation. So going back and looking at the storm total precip, this is radar estimated. You can see that the radar was estimating in the area up to 1/4 inch of precipitation. And for the most part, this is pretty pixelated, and just looking at the radar and the path of that northern storm cell, I really think this was probably an overestimate at the location of the fire, but with areas just to the north and east, it's probably a good estimation. So that's one thing we're looking at. The Wildland Fire group also takes a look at the observed dry lightning across the United States and compares it to how moist or dry your fuels are. You'll notice that there's a big swath, the central part of the United States, that they do not have fuel data for. So they do not know whether or not the conditions were overly dry, overly wet. So they're lacking this data in our area. However, you'll see a few blue spots here between Arkansas, Louisiana, and East Texas, and this is indicating that they believe there was dry lightning in the area. If we take a closer look, zooming in on this image, you can see there was at least a strike in eastern Texas, but we are looking at the strike here in northwest Louisiana. It seems a little south to me of where our Fryeburg Fire might be, but needless to say, they were reporting that they believe we had dry lightning in the area. And this is probably more to drive home the point. They have now overlaid the estimated rainfall with where they believe the dry lightning strike occurred. So you could see that this lightning strike occurred kind of on the edge of an area that might have received up to 1/10 of an inch of rain, with the brunt of the moisture that actually occurred to the north of where this lightning occurred. So what happened on Tuesday? Tuesday we had the much drier air moving into the area. Our winds were still out of the north, and our temperatures, although not as warm as we saw there on Monday, were still quite warm. We first started noticing the smoke plume from the Fryeburg Fire being picked up by our radar just before noontime. And that's what you see in this image. It was kind of the first real pulse of the smoke plume that we saw. At the time, the Minden ASOS was reporting 82 degrees, 24% humidity. It was the first time the humidity had dropped below 25% this day. And the winds were out of the north at 7 miles an hour. By 4 p.m., the smoke plume was very evident. It had been going on for the better part of 4 hours. And the ASOS Minden observation was reporting 88 degrees at this point in time with 16% humidity, and the winds had actually shifted to the west and were at 5 miles an hour. If you took a look at the satellite imagery at this point in time, which the most recent satellite image I had on the visible was from 3:45, you can see a very well-developed plume of smoke drifting to the southeast from the Bienville and Webster Parish lines. So we had a well-developed fire in the area. Now interesting, if you move out another hour plus a little, we noticed a second plume going up to the east of the initial fire. So this plume that you see here to the west is related to our Fryeburg Fire, and this fire out here to the east we believe is the Liberty Hill Fire. At 5 p.m. it was still 87 degrees in Minden with a 15% humidity. The winds were once again north-northwest at 8 miles an hour, which was really helping to fuel these fires at this time. If you take a look at the satellite image from 5 p.m., again, you can see two nice plumes. Our first plume was related to the Fryeburg Fire. The second plume was related to the Liberty Hill Fire. So in summary, dry lightning likely occurred Monday evening with our isolated thunderstorms. Given how dry we were leading into the 3 months up to this event, plus the likelihood that the strike likely occurred out of the thunderstorm core and did not have as much rain, that's the reason we believe there is the possibility that we had dry lightning in the area. If the Fryeburg Fire was started by lightning, it could have smoldered until early Tuesday afternoon when we saw the north-northwest winds start to increase and our humidity values drop below 25%. But we can't say for sure whether or not this fire was started by lightning. Only arson investigators can do that, and we will leave it to the professionals to determine whether or not this was a lightning-started fire or accidental or possibly human caused. I want to thank you for listening today, and I hope you enjoyed this video.